Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next of our talks in Research Talk Qualitative Conversation Series. Today, Jeff Petruzzelli and I are very happy to be talking with Cheryl Poth, and Cheryl's going to be giving us a little bit about what she's got going on. One conversation we'll have is about a book that she's just worked with a co-author to update. I'll let her introduce the book title and more to you. And my name is Ray Maeta, president of Research Talk. Jeff, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Jeff Petruzzelli, a qualitative research specialist at ResearchTalk.
Great. And then Cheryl, if you want to introduce yourself to everybody.
Hi, I'm Cheryl. I'm happy to be here. And I am at the University of Alberta up in Western Canada. I've worked with ResearchTalk for many years, 2 decades,
Yes.
and counting, I hope. But I'm really happy to be here. And actually, I took my first workshop, from my co-author, who we're going to talk about, at a ResearchTalk conference about 2 decades ago. So you never know who you're going to meet. So today I want to talk about the 5th edition of the Qualitative Inquiry and Research Design, which is co-authored with John Creswell. I am his co-author. I joined John on the 4th edition in 2018. Benefited from being able to work with an established author on an established book. And then I had the good luck of being invited back to do the next edition, which I'm told is a good indication that you didn't mess it up. So that's a good thing. When you join somebody like that, what you do is then you take on a little bit more of responsibility. So I think John would agree that I led the revisions on this edition. And I already have a list for the 6th edition. So I'm banking on being able to continue, which is kind of fun. This book is an interesting book. It was first published in 1988 on the 1st edition. And John was really a pioneer in the field when he talked in qualitative research. This book is focused on 5 different approaches. So we have narrative inquiry, grounded theory, ethnography, case study, and ethnography. And so that book then, what it does is it presents kind of a little bit about the qualitative process. And then we talk a lot about how you get started on the design and then how you might choose among those 5. And we totally recognize that there is lots and lots of other approaches other than those 5 that you can choose from. But this was selected because they were the ones that had some structure to them and allowed you to see kind of how those differences and how you might be able to choose among them. We then go into depth around each of those 5. And in this new edition, we updated all the references and we're talking a little bit more about the things that people want to hear about. So for example, ethical considerations, the use of theory, and even technical developments just kind of have a little bit more of a more prominent role in the 5th edition than the 4th. And then we talk a lot about the variations within each approach. And so I think that's one thing we certainly don't ever want to come across that this is the only way. And I think you can even use a combination of ways, but that this book is focused on helping folks navigate almost like how they're different. And then we also compare across them. So it reminds me a little bit like if you want to focus on the individual, then you might want to consider more narrative approaches or more even case study. But if you want to look at a group experience, then maybe you want to look at phenomenology, maybe you want to look at grounded theory or develop a theory around the group experience. And so I will say, though, I think my favorite chapter, if you'd ask me, is the last chapter, which is chapter 11. And I wish I could tell more about how when people access the book, because I think I would want to read this one first. And it's called Turning the Story. What it does is what we do is we turn the story in that we take the same problem and we address it from the 5 different lenses. And it demonstrates about how, because it's not about one being better than the other. It's about the fit with the problem and what you want to generate out of your qualitative inquiry. And so I really love that because I think it opens up this idea that we can actually come at research in all of these different approaches. And maybe it might be that by reading that chapter, you might get inspired, like none of these 5 actually work for this. And I want to go beyond this into something different. And then maybe reading the first beginning chapters around qualitative inquiry, how it's distinguishing from other approaches of research, then it might actually just stimulate maybe some innovative thinking about other ways of being able to pursue research.
And I really like what you just, the introduction you just gave, because this book for me would be easy for lots of folks we've worked with to just bypass thinking, I know the traditions, I'm interested in them, but I'm not going to strictly follow one. So for folks who are in that mindset or folks who kind of work in a more hybrid, why and how do they benefit from becoming familiar with you and John and your work?
Well, I think we're thoughtful in that we're very careful not to say this is the way. And I think we really want to spark or catalyze folks to kind of use this as the foundational. We also want you to know that there are some traditions, the history of different approaches as well, I think is interesting. So for each of the approaches, we talk about the origins, we talk about the defining features, and this time we even put together a little bit of a checklist, things that might indicate that something is more grounded theory like or more that way. And so I think even by using that checklist, you might look at a study that maybe doesn't even identify the design. And you can begin to see kind of what it's more like and maybe why researchers have those particular features in this study. Or it might even help you when you're reading other research that maybe you're like, oh, it would benefit from having this description in there. And so I think sometimes our challenge is that when we don't follow an approach, that sometimes we miss out on some of the core features of qualitative research in our write-ups. And so I think it makes it difficult for folks then to be able to judge the credibility of research when we don't give if I can, enough methodological or design information for a reader in our reports. Or let's say you've been writing a research grant, or maybe you're new to qualitative research and you want to know, you only have limited space. Where should I be putting my space? What would people expect to see? How do I build my credibility as a mixed methods researcher by including particular information in it? When I went back and even now I look at, what is qualitative research? One of our defining features is studying people or events in a natural setting. And Ray, I've been thinking a lot about, so what is your natural setting these days? Like the online environment, is that not, for many of us, our natural setting?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it is interesting to see kind of the changes, how that happens, and how much you learn from it. So, it's interesting too, when I listen to you now, people really need kind of the idea of why qualitative, what are the theoretical underpinnings, comparing those across the traditions gives that, and kind of finding tools. Another thing that you and I and Jeff have talked a lot about is the way that people kind of approach traditions is to just find the differences, which is great. But the way that you lay out the book and lay out each tradition, it allows folks to also find what's similar. So if someone doesn't want to live parked at a tradition, say grounded theory or whatever it might be, they like it, but they want to really think of kind of how ideas meld, you really set this up as a way to invite people to find their own rhythm through the strengths that attract them, that really run across the five.
I'm so glad. And if I can, there's a couple of things I want to mention. And it's about, like, I really love, what speaks to me about qualitative research is the role of the researcher. We're involved in it and we acknowledge that, we own it almost. But I also think it's important for us to be reflexive about who we are as people. And when we come into different settings and being aware of some of the assumptions, philosophical life experiences, all of those things that makes us who we are as a researcher, which for the most part is a benefit. But every once in a while, we also have to kind of, check ourselves and reminding ourselves as, we are who we are, and what am I bringing, and what else do I have to learn from other folks? And then how do I also, in my writing, build credibility with my readers? So there might be some aspects that you might want to include about yourself in your writing, because it actually is to the benefit of those reading your research. And I don't think we always see that evidence. So for example, if you're part of a particular community and you're also studying them, that might give you what we sometimes call a little bit more of a insider perspective. And sometimes folks think that that's not a good thing, and they kind of want to even avoid telling other people about it. But I do think in some ways it does help us to build that credibility for working with that community, and particularly given the discussions that we have now about ethical research and about reciprocity and about all the things that we want to practice as qualitative researchers and have impacts, lasting impacts and good impacts, if I can, on our communities.
Yeah, when we talk to young scholars who are building their libraries and the libraries are growing, and some of them still get budgets for books, which is a great thing. One of the questions we get a lot is, in qualitative, when there's a new edition, how much has it changed? If I have the fourth or the third, do I need the fifth? We have one closing question after this. When you're thinking about the fifth, what are the very specific rewards that readers are going to get because they're picking up the fifth, even if they've never looked at the other four, or maybe they have all of the other four? So yeah, what are you and John bringing to the fifth edition?
Well, I guess I'm just so happy to see that it has endured in the way that it has. It has a huge uptake in kind of use of courses, and as introductory, both used in courses and for individual researchers. So I'm really happy with that. One of the things that I think it really brings is the field continues to move forward in so many ways. And I think the real benefit is being brought to that updated references. And I think in the fourth edition, I added more descriptive to the end of chapter list of further readings. And I think that really helps people to know where to spend their money and their time and their resources in the reading about each of these approaches as well. And so I think that updated piece, and as we all know, some editions get more updated than others. And so I think having a look at that, and I also think the role of technology, and I mean, and even the next edition will have more on, kind of the very fast moving world of AI, but we're certainly talking, about technology and how technology can be leveraged in qualitative research. I also think we want to think about, that we're having important discussions about technology and how we're actually capturing qualitative research, and between the software, between the very popular way of being able to share your perspective using 140 characters. But is that really qualitative research? And sometimes, sure, but maybe sometimes it's actually not, because it lacks some of the contextual information that we tend to prioritize. It's like if you talked to me 5 years ago, I'm slightly different. And when you talk to me in this edition, I hope to think I've evolved in the right direction. Or at least I'm thinking about things differently. And I think that comes out, I think, for both John and I. And it's one of the things I love working with John on this book, is that, he's got this, he remembers, what we were talking about then and kind of where the conversation has evolved from.
Beautiful. Yeah. So one other thing that, having seen and looked at and worked with you in co-teaching from the other editions, that we were just really happy to see is the color, the cover is very, very different, and it's great. But and people don't always know that authors, depending on the publisher and all that, have different degrees of choice, but you had some choice in this image. So if you could just talk a little bit about what the image says. What are your thoughts?
I love that question, because often we do have some say in terms of that. Often they'll provide a number of choices. This was actually an easy one, and I don't know exactly why John and I both kind of came to it. I can only speak for myself, but one of the things I love about this image is it has some movement in it, and it also harks, I think, to like a natural setting. It reminds me of like a coral reef, and for me, coral reefs are relaxing. So I'm usually on vacation when I see them. There's something about the sense of them. And I mean, we hear a lot about gloom and doom about the coral reefs. And every once in a while, when I see regrowth and rebirth, in places that I have the true privilege of being able to visit. And so this reminds me, I think the colors as well reminds me of, I think, qualitative researchers and qualitative research. It's constantly rebirthing again in kind of new and different ways. And sometimes you get these synergies. And so a big piece of the coral reef is the symbiotic relationships between organisms that live them. Some of them you see, some of them you can't see, but that there's a lot of stuff going on in a reef. And I think it reminds me about the community of global qualitative researchers. And that sometimes, people are moving in a particular direction that it takes some of us a little while to catch on to, right? And then you see these schools of fish go through, and so I think this one kind of resonates with us, or at least with me, because of that idea of we're constantly reinventing ourselves as qualitative researchers. And I think we're also elevating some of the conversations that are happening in research in general because of the innovations that we have within our particular field.
Yeah. And you know, it's great that your description too, and the coral reef reference, it brings me to what I think is just so empowering with what we do as qualitative experts is detail and nuance matter, whether you can see it or not. So pointing out that we don't see anything, and then really empowering things that really might on first glance seem insignificant. Pause. You maybe not. So Jeff, as we move toward a close to our conversation, I just wanted to see if you had any other points of inquiry or anything you want to underscore from from Cheryl's conversation today.
Since we just talked about the cover image, I think that's what's fresh in my mind. When I look at that picture on the cover, I see almost three or four sort of distinct sections. And I really like the idea of, in qualitative, how we have these different pieces that we bring together. And it's, how are they distinct, but also how do they speak to each other? How do they fit together? And how do they combine to really give us the full picture? That kind of image really speaks to that qualitative piece to me.
It's the zooming in to see the detail and then zooming out to see the connection.
Yeah, it's great. So I'll ask you just to kind of give a closing statement in a second, but I want to let everybody who's listening know at the end of the recording, please stay tuned because we will have information on where to get the book. It's available through Sage Publications. So we'll have that information available before the recording stops. But just, Cheryl, anything you want to say wrapping up? And I'll let you go wherever you want. It's great to hear you have the sixth in mind. You don't have to talk about that, but anything you want to say in closing?
It's a great book. I mean, I come at this from, I used it, before I was involved in it. And now I certainly have the true pleasure of being able to help direct the direction in which we take it. And I'm truly grateful to John for having me along for the ride and reflect all the great things that are happening within the field of qualitative research.
I've known John and co-written with him. And when I heard that you were coming on board for this book, it brought a special smile to my face. And I really feel good about that partnership you guys have established. Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. Really appreciate it. And we'll be talking to you again and again as we move forward. So thank you so much.
Thanks.